I know that you had one question, Jocelyn, about logical reasoning being outside the scope. That was one of the questions that you sent me. How do you know when?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. When something, because I guess it's like, I guess it's the whole mindset thing of like when you're reading something and it's like, okay, before you look at the answer, let's try to guess the answer. And so then I'll guess the answer, but then I'll look down or whatever, or like your examples, and I'm like, wow, I didn't think of that at all. Like, if that makes sense, or like mine was out of scope, or like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's like sometimes I jump too far. Like, I'll either not jump or I'll jump too far in like the reasoning, if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And so outside the scope is a phrase that I see a lot in various explanations online. And I don't love that phrase because to me, it's a cop-out. Like if I was writing LSAT explanations and someone said outside the scope, I'd be like, that person was lazy to describe it that way because we've got to go deeper. How is it outside the scope? Outside the scope just means it was not supported. It was not warranted to assume that. But why wasn't it warranted? What kind of leap were they making? Like confusing, necessary, and sufficient is a way of being outside the scope. So I think when you look at what is reasonable to assume and what is not reasonable to assume, reasonability is, of course, in the eye of the beholder. And the way we evaluate that is based on familiarity with LSAC's definition of a kind of reasonable person standard. And so it does come through exposure to the exam. But I want you to look at more specifically, what does it mean in a given circumstance? When it comes to, when we talk about pre-phrasing, it comes in a lot there too, right? Because is there a certain question that gives you trouble?
Not at the moment. I don't have my stuff, but I would, if I would go and I would show you, but I don't have my stuff.
No, that's fine. So I'm thinking back to when I was discussing with Ume about necessary assumption questions. I said that necessary assumption questions, they'll oftentimes have a new idea in the conclusion that did not appear in the evidence. And that new idea being in the conclusion is actually outside the scope. Its presence is not warranted there given the evidence. It's not justified to be there. But with necessary assumption questions, our job is not to point out flaws or gaps. Our job is actually to see what needs to be the case for the argument to work. Not what would alone be sufficient to guarantee the argument, but what does the argument require? So we're actually looking at it in more of an inference perspective. So we're looking for things that are within the scope of the argument, not beyond it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Awesome. So I would say when I think about outside the scope, I'd be thinking about what is within that inference family, like must be true, most supported, necessary assumption. Things that the argument requires are all within the scope and are supported by the evidence and by the reasoning or by the argument. Things beyond would be new information. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.